observing my handiwork, just a very, very slight sound caught my attention. And it was weird. Because it sounded like this. It sounded like... It's weird. And while I'm trying to figure out, I remember looking down at the bottom of the wall, and the drywall was all wet. And I'm like, oh, that's not right. What? And so I just got feeling around going, and I put my ear to the wall, and then I could hear the valve. And I'm thinking to myself, calm down. Did I put a screw right through a pipe? And so I begin undoing my incredible handiwork. And I pull it out, and I'm listening, and now the wet started to kind of go up the wall a little bit, and so I start cutting through the drywall, see if I can figure out what's going on there. And sure enough, at one point I cut it through, and all of a sudden this gusher of water comes squirting out of the wall. I put a screw right through the middle of a copper pipe that couldn't have been more than that big around. Well, obviously the water I turned off didn't turn it off to there, but I had no idea where the main water valve was and how I could turn this off. None. So I'm out behind the place, I'm looking around, I'm talking to fellow, store owners on the other side. They have no idea. Meanwhile, our storage room is flooding. It's going out the front of the bathroom door into the main storage room. And it's like, well, you get a bucket, do something. I told one of the employees, get a bucket, catch the water. What a mess. Finally called the people that own the whole complex that we rented. They came, you had to get underground to turn off some main valve, which was not only us, but our neighbors as well. Shoes, we had to lift all the shoes off the ground, that we stored back there, boxes of shoes they were getting all the time. It was a total and utter mess. And then when we got done, the smell began coming up from the hole that I had removed the toilet from, to give this perfect ambiance to this horrible mess that I had created. And I remember at the end of about a 10-hour day, when I was way, way worse off than I was before the start of the day, I thought, how could I be so well-intentioned and make such a huge mess? And I have to confess, there's been other way more important areas in my life where I've had to say the same thing. I tried to do a good thing. I tried to make things go well. I really wanted to work out. But it seems like no matter how hard I tried or what I did, I just made a mess. You ever been there? You ever said, I've tried in my marriage, I've tried with my kids, I've tried in my finances, I've tried to become a better person. Why is it everything I seem to touch sometimes just seems like it doesn't work out? That's being person. Paul, the first century missionary and follower of Jesus, put it in such succinct words. See if you can relate to what he said. He said, I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all of my heart, I really do, but there's another power within me that's at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Can you relate? See, we just make messes. And it occurs to me that when we stare our messes square in the face, we can become one of three kinds of people. The first kind of person we can become, let's call that person a blamer. We can become a blamer. A blamer pretty much goes like this. God, why did you let this happen? You're supposed to be powerful. You're supposed to be so good. And if you're powerful and good, then how could you allow these circumstances to be? God, this is your fault. Blamer. You ever blame God for the messes of your life? Now, I know you'd look at me and say, Dave, you're like a holy man. You're like a pastor. You've never done that, have you? Yeah. I remember about 5 or 6 years into pastoral ministry, I went through a really interesting season of life. My eyes had begun to be open as to what I call the reality of following Jesus, and the whole legalism and hypocrisy and plastic nature of so much of religion was becoming apparent to me. And I was something that was real and revolutionary and fresh and powerful like Jesus was. And I began to understand these things. And as I did, I began to teach about it. And I began to talk about it to other people. And by virtue of what I did, what began to happen is there were some people in the church that I pastored that decided that I was the most recent manifestation of the Antichrist. I was a compromiser of the faith, and I needed to be removed from ministry at all costs. And they began to talk and to circulate letters amongst themselves. They contacted the Wisconsin Fellowship of Baptist Churches, which is the group that we were a part of. And the leadership began to pass referendums that were supposed to be binding, condemning the very things that I was leading our church to do. There was a national publication that got wind of what I was doing. And because I graduated from an institution that did not allow us to do the things that I was beginning to do, they decided they needed to make an example of me. And so letters were circulated around the country to hundreds of churches, pastored by people that I went to school with and that I knew, who warned them about me and what I had to say and tried to figure out ways to combat the arguments that I had posed as to why Christianity should be done this way. And I began to be shunned everywhere I went with my religious circles. I was shunned in my own church. I was shunned in my state fellowship. Even nationwide, I was the object of scorn. Now I'll make matters even worse. My wife ruptures a disc in her neck while I am in the Soviet Union. And I take an emergency flight back home. My wife ends up having very intricate, this was like 1991, all right, January, very intricate, delicate neurosurgery. The recovery time was, well, it was like 6 to 8 months. But for the first 5 or 6 weeks, we couldn't even have the 4 children that we had at that time in our home for fear that they might jump up on our lap and touch her in a way that it would ruin the entire surgical procedure. So we had to ship our kids out to relatives while we stayed home alone, while Sandy is trying to recover from very debilitating surgery. We watched the medical bills begin to pile up. It got more complicated. Found out during the whole time Sandy was pregnant. And even though she'd been asked with every procedure, are you have any medical condition? No. Are you pregnant? No. And so they did things to her. They performed tests on her, MRIs, x-rays, medication they would never give to a pregnant woman. And so when they found out that we were pregnant, they came to us and they said, you must abort this child because this child will most surely be deformed in some significant way. Got more complicated. 6 months earlier, in a move to save money, I dropped maternity coverage on insurance. So now we were pregnant with what was most likely going to be a deformed child with severe disability, and we had no coverage on any of that. No pressure to that, is there? Now I remember one night I got a telephone call, somebody in our church. Oh, big fight. You know, wife left, gotta come and help me. I've been trying to help him months. And it was a cool rainy night. I got out and I shoveled the driveway and I brush off the car and I get it and I'm heading down this road and the winds are blowing and the snow was coming to help this couple that so far hadn't listened to anything I had to say anyway with all the stuff going on. And I drive down the road and I'm thinking tomorrow is Sunday. I am not ready for the 3 messages that I have to preach. I have to preach the message for Sunday school, I have to preach the message for the morning service, and I have to preach the message for the evening service. And I'm not even ready for one. And so I'm starting to talk to God. And I'm going, this is what my prayer was like. Thanks, God. Really appreciate it. Perfect night to let this happen. Because I'm not ready for tomorrow. Thanks, God. By the way, God, while I'm thanking you right now, I just want to thank you for the financial mess I'm in. I want to thank you for the surgery that my wife went through. I want to thank you for the fact that right now she is pregnant with a probably very disabled child. I want to thank you that nobody in my church likes me, nobody in my state fellowship likes me, and everybody in the country that I'm up here with think that I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing. God, thank you for the ministry. Seriously. Now, one of the nice things about actually saying that is when you hear the words, you go, ooh. And at any moment, I expected the road to open up, Fisher straight to hell, my car would drive over it.